morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. Hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and I got some news for you guys. Today we're going to talk about the new Fusion champion, which is going to be Timit the Fool. He is going to be a Bannerlord champion that is an HP Force Legendary. There's been a lot of impatience, or I would say a lot of waiting for this guy, and I'm actually really hopeful that he's going to be pretty, awesome, going to be pretty nice. And let's just dive into it before we go into our opinions about this guy. I want to break down his kit and kind of talk about what is supposed to be like the selling point of this champion, and then see, my overall thoughts on him. And we'll talk about also Prism crystals, as well as some other news that I want to share with you guys that it's going to be pretty exciting, okay? So with that being said, Timit, Carnival Hammer, his A1 is going to be attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit heals this champion by 10% of their max HP. So that looks like you get a 20% HP hit in terms of healing altogether. And that can scale even more. It looks like it, yeah. If the target has no active buffs, each hit can also fills this champion turn meter by 10%. So when booked, he can do an extra 20% damage, and then when fully booked, he has a additional 20% heal. That's actually that's a big deal for being able to survive and stay alive for a long time. Especially as a high HP champion in general, he's going to be really tanky is the way I'm already perceiving him, right? Test your strength. On a 6-turn cooldown, when fully booked, is going to be a 4-turn cooldown. He attacks all enemies, decreases the duration of all enemy buffs by 3 turns. If there are no enemies with active buffs, he gets an extra turn. Always grants an extra turn if Kaja the Rai, which is his partner, is on the same team, even if there are enemies with active buffs. Interesting ability. I think, honestly, when I first heard about this champion, this was supposed to be the ability that sells him. Because being able to, strip or be able to remove buffs right now has been conditional with the fact that you're going to have, a bunch of other stuff like debuffs in play. Like, you think of Uko, you think of Madame Ceres, for example, and those champions normally come with applying debuffs afterwards, and that is susceptible to something like Sheep, for example, right? So this guy instead is able to apply the decreased duration, which is kind of a pseudo version of being able to strip, because most buffs, I would say, are pretty much around 2 to 3 turn duration anyway. So he's pretty much going to bring it down altogether. Now, keep in mind, it says attacks all enemies, which means that it is conditional to or susceptible to weak hits. And I think that's going to be something that we got to keep in mind, because he is a Force champion. So if he's going against a Spirit-based champion, then there's a chance he could fail, right? But anyways, I digress. Let's get into his third ability, Kegs of Dread. I'll say that 3 times. It's on a 6-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies. Before attacking, places a 50% increased accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns, and then places a True Fear debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. Interesting series of events. I noticed that they've been doing this a lot more with being able to do multiple things in one ability, which is kind of cool, but then it also has its drawbacks, right? Especially with polymorph being such a prominent aspect. And I don't know if you kind of noticed, I've been talking a lot more about PvP related content, so I think that this guy is swinging more in line with being a arena type champion for sure. 6-turn cooldown, booked down to another 4-turn cooldown. He has a pretty hefty amount of cooldown durations. 4 turns is a little bit more than the norm. Norm is probably 3, and then ideally it's less than that if you can help it, right? So the way that I understand it is going to go is that he applies the increased accuracy, then he hits, and then as a part of that hit, he's also placing the True Fear. I believe this is supposed to be susceptible to Sheep because it is placing a debuff, so that does make sense. With his passive, though, Hideous Assistant, whenever an enemy's skill successfully activates while they're under that fear, or a True Fear debuff, it fills Timit's turn meter by 10%. That's interesting because only one of his abilities are the ones that are applying fear in a sense. So maybe there's a big control element with this guy that makes him very unique. I'm not entirely sure here. Whenever an enemy skill does not activate because they're under a fear or True Fear, you place a Provoke on that enemy instead for 1 turn. This particular effect only applies when Kaja the Rai is on the same team. That's a little unfortunate, because the reason why is this is being able to take a turn away from somebody from fear or True Fear is already value, right? That's a 1-turn downtime with True Fear that puts that ability on cooldown if they were using abilities. And then being able to apply a Provoke on them means that you have another turn of CC that's awaiting for them unless they got some kind of external cleanse or some kind of factor to keep them from being locked out. That's good value, especially in an environment like PvP. Sometimes you only need 1 or 2 turns to really get what you need to get going, right? And the fact that it is conditional to his partner kind of does bring it down. Conditional champions, as I said before in plenty of other videos, is that the better the champion, or the less reliant they are upon other external factors, the more consistent they're going to be, which means that consistency leads to their effectiveness being higher, and that effectiveness makes their champion more desirable, more, you know, basically higher on the tier list of power scaling, if we're going to go down that list, right? I do feel like that one's kind of like an interesting one because they did associate it to Kaj the Rai, at least in 2 abilities. So I think that depending on how Kaj the Rai is built in her kit and is designed, we're gonna see if that is going to be a strong coupling factor, or if it's just gonna be something that's kind of like a DOA, dead on arrival. It's not gonna be doing too well in terms of like how it works in the current terrain of Teleria. With that being said, he does have an aura that increases accuracy in all battles by 50, so it's not the highest, but it's not the worst either for a legendary champion. Not too bad. I think a lot of people are kind of torn on this guy. I think that there's a couple factors that I would like to see. I would like to see his base stats because he could be a champion that's predicated upon maybe not being a damage outlet, but more of a control outlet. A tanky control outlet is the way I'm kind of visibly understanding this champion right now. That's my interpretation of him, right? With being able to remove buffs from the enemy, as well as keep himself alive, maybe being able to buff while controlling the enemy, and then if you have Kaj the Rai, and Kaj the Rai is really, really strong, then he complements her by having some associative factors that are on par with her just being in the team, right? Extra provokes and things of that sort could make him a very, very strong control champion. Now, this meta, because of polymorph in terms of PvP, has not been generous to a lot of CC or just debuffs in general. So that is a problem that players have to face if they are going to bring Timit to the field. But I was thinking, for example, like being able to attack all enemies as an example. Maybe if you pair him with, I don't want to say exactly going the Uko route, but like going in a route that could give you that value. Like being able to strip champions with the A2 if you have them in like a provoke set or a stun set or something around those lines. Maybe you can get that stun off because they don't have that block debuff available anymore, which means that your control is established. Maybe you can go a bolster or tankier route because he heals himself so much, as well as, you know, being able to apply a little bit of CC. He's a foundational shell for your team, right? You know, bolster and shield like sets scale off of the champion that has it equipped, scales off of their HP, and since he's an HP champion, might be significant. Another thing too is we don't really know his multipliers in terms of how his damage output's going to look. So who knows? Maybe this guy is a hitter. Maybe he does pack a punch, and that might be instead of him being more of your control unit, he's actually more of your powerhouse, and you can actually like see him swing into the field and cause a lot of disruption in terms of just damage pressure, for example. So there's a lot of factors that we still have to get exposed to. I did want to show you guys something that I thought would be pretty cool to illustrate, and this also is going to come with like a little bit of an announcement too as well. I did want to give you guys a heads up that we did recently apply to become a part of the Player in Partnership program, and hopefully I can get this up and running for you guys here in the not too distant future. Let's see here. And we got accepted, and I want to give a big salute out to everybody that helped me along the way. I want to thank you guys. But as a part of the Perks and Rewards, we get to see a little bit more of him. So this is a little bit of a reference point of how he looks going into the game. If you want to see a full wide span of him before he becomes active, this is going to be what you're going to be able to see. Really, really cool looking. Guy has that carnival horror vibe, you know, like clownish, like carnival style approach. It looks like they were trying to make him look menacing as a part of the Bannerlord tribe. It looks very, very cool. I actually have to say that I wasn't expecting him to look as clean, and that's one thing I gotta say. Like the player and development department, they really, when it comes to the designs, they're on it. They know exactly what they're doing, and I have no complaints. I mean, you have the clownish carnival aspect in them, but you also have that element of just like realistic, dangerous vibes that you get from them, and I think that's super, super cool, right? So with that being said. What are your thoughts on it? Do you feel like this champion is someone that is desirable for you? I believe he's going to be a Fragment Fusion champion, so like if you guys are not familiar with it, the way I kind of place them is that Fragment champions are a little bit easier than your traditionals, and your traditionals are a little bit easier to acquire versus your hybrid fusions. So I think hybrid fusions so far have been really indicative, especially the recent one we have with like Emic, for example, was very demanding. So you have to be, you know, aware of like how difficult it is. Do you have the resources? I know we've had like a lot of very, very lucrative shard events that may have like stressed your shard pool a little bit. If you guys are a little worried about that, let me know in the comments below. Let me like how do you guys feel about this? Is this a W, a dud, or is this champion something interesting to look into? I also want to warn you guys, be careful about premature speculation. We always want to make sure that we get full information before we fully judge a character, and sometimes that means you have to see the character through and kind of really get a feel of the terrain of how he injects himself into our environments and whatnot. So definitely give him a look at. I think I'm gonna go for him, and I talked about this before when I was live with my stream. We had a moment where it was asking questions like, "Are you gonna go for it, Soul?" And my biggest thing was, even if the champion doesn't prove to be like one of like significant value, immediately, like from a kit standpoint. I look at him from a different lens, or look at fusions from a different lens nowadays because of where I'm at. Now, that's my disclaimer. This is based on the point of view of where I'm at in the game. I've gotten to a point on my account where, like, I am pretty effective at being able to farm the things I need to farm in the game, whether it's hard dungeons, you know, the Phantom Shogun, the most recent content that came out, as well as, like, a bunch of other dungeons. Hydras, even now, I'm doing really, really good in. I just had a personal best not too long ago that I was able to achieve in the hundreds of millions of damage, which is really, really cool. But at this point, I'm looking to min-max my efficiency even more. And a part of that's going to be, how can I get that? And even if I don't have use for Timit immediately, at least as far as visibly can be seen, I look at it as like, the many times that we've all pulled shards, there has been cases where when we pull a shard, we end up getting a redundant fusion champion that we went for before. I'll give you an example. I got Nishak, a part of the Prism Crystal event, and he was a fusion champion, so like having an extra one of him allowed me to elevate my Skinwalker's faction guardians up an extra notch, right? You see it right there, the plus 30 accuracy and the plus 30 resistance was courtesy of the rats. So with that being said, I'm looking at it from the lens of like, even though this is a long-term projection in terms of like efficiency, getting one step closer to being able to finish that with what I would consider more accessible champions. This is one within elements of our control. We don't have to play the RNG of the shard. I'm going to go for fusions a lot more aggressively, because if I do get copies of them, I'll be able to just inject them to the faction guardians, and I'm already getting value out of it. And in particular, Bannerlord has some of the strongest champions in the game that are currently meta. For example, you have the Ukrainian duo in Turris and Marishka. Baron is no slouch. He's actually one of the heaviest hitters in the game. His Sky Piercer hurts. It actually cooks bolster teams like the ones I use, for example. And to be honest with you, Stultus I use in Dragon. He could also be in PvP. Rhonda, another PvP champion. There's a lot of value from, if you're using those champions, having someone like Timit and maybe a duplicate of him down the road. You know, I'm not trying to impose that on you, but like if you do so happen to get one, you can get value out of it, right? And that's the way I was looking at it from my account. I do think that Timit's A2 is going to be an interesting dynamic if it works the way I'm hoping it does. I believe there was conversations about being worried about it proccing sheep, even though it's not supposed to. At least that's my interpretation. I'll inquire with Plarium and the powers that be to see if there's any information or clarity that can be given there. But my understanding is that it shouldn't proc it, and as such, that might be a dynamic that's very, very strong for PvP content. So keep that in mind if you're ever going for the champion. As always, let me know if you guys are going to go for it or if this is a hard pass. With that being said, let's get into the next little bit of information. This was kind of a surprise for me. I wasn't expecting one so quickly, shortly after our recent experience. And I guess maybe it's been a little bit since I last looked, but the Rotos / champion pool that we had for Prism Crystals just recently passed, and we had the Siffy event with the 2x and 10x, right, together associated. Following that, we're already back into another Prism Crystal event, and I guess maybe it's because it's all Halloween themed. You see Battle Khazar, Calvlex, these all look like menacing champions and whatnot, and it's cool. I think that this one is kind of more of a pass. I did pull like two attempts while I was live on Twitch, and to be honest with you, we got our rares. We got rare text. But if I were to put my finger in it, in this particular Prism Crystal, do we care about it? Do we care about this event? I think that, let's look at it from like an early game account. A lot of these epics are very valuable for early game progression. I mean, Seeker's no slouch. Gore Grab is really good for early game Arena. Allure is really good for early game Fire Knight, for example. Miscreated Monster for Spider, as well as just general content in general. You know, he's got shield, he's got heals, he's got stuns, he's got control. He's got a lot of aspects behind it that'll give you value as you're progressing in the game, right? So good champions. Rector, one of the strong, a mini Duchess, basically, without being an actual Duchess. Husk, long-term, really, really strong in terms of, like, Hydra content, you know? A lot of good value, right? On the more progressed side, though, I will say that that becomes less valuable. And then, considering where I'm at, I consider myself more of, like, a late-game player. I'm looking at a lot of these champions and, like, what kind of content can I get value out of them? Well, I already own 2 Calvalexes, so, mind you, like I said, I'm looking for my point of view on this one. I don't need a third. I think that 2 is, like, perfect for where I need to be at, so less value there. I don't have him a Charlotte, although if I did get one, would I want to use him in any particular content? Maybe in some niche Hydra comps. I thought about maybe using him in Arena, for example, and I feel like he does, like, a lot of fearing and a lot of leeches and whatnot, and I feel like that could be dangerous to incorporate into a polymorph-based meta. So, less so much there. Now, he's really valuable, and this is good for, like, early mid-gamers that are still trying to develop a champion pool. He is able to keep 100% uptime. He's one of the originals that could do 100% uptime on speed by himself, increased speed, which allows you to do some 2-1 comps or maybe even faster, depending on what you got going on. Very, very valuable champion. and will help with that kind of level of progression. He's no slouch now. He can hit too, so that's a good one. Noct, I don't really view him as like a champion that anybody really wants to go too far out of their way for. There is some mechanics of sleep that might be really cool to incorporate, and I think of like maybe Sand Devils as an example, but I don't think I would go for this champion in particular because of that one area of content that I can see maybe some potential value in, and even then I don't really see it. Halfrack, on the other hand, actually a really, really substantial nuker. As you're progressing the game, you start getting exposed to Stone Skin, and Halfrack is one of the champions that abuses that the most because, you know, if your team is going slow and they end up getting cooked along the way, he automatically gets one of his heaviest hitting abilities, which is Halfrack Scorn, procced as a part of his passive. You know, when one of his allies dies, he procs it. Now, it is on like a 5 or 4 turn cooldown if it's booked, but that automatically is just extra pressure damage while he's protected under Stone Skin, right? So, not CCable unless it's stripped, and then, of course, also on top of that, being able to get extra damage behind that veil of shielding from Stone Skin makes him a very valuable champion. Or just in general, he's a strong nuker. He does do decent damage. Shemnaf has the potential as well as a nuker for stripping or increasing the duration of their buffs on your team, and then, you know, decreasing the debuffs on the enemy team. Like, stuff like that's really valuable. Decreased defense. He does do a little, Shemnaf does do a decent amount of damage. But not one of the more sought-out champions, so I don't know how I feel about that. That one's kind of like it's okay if you have it, especially early game, but as time goes by, this one probably gets power crept. Battle Khazar, one of the original, like, Solo Dragon 25 champions that could do a lot of, like, solo clearing. With the recent events we've been having with, like, these, how do you say it, champions that, like, specific faction-type events and whatnot, Battle has seen a little bit of resurgence for it, but I think this is a short-lived experience. Maybe there is some value behind like a duo comp for him in the Harder Dragon content areas, so there may be some value there towards the end. But other than that, though, I think he's also one of those champions that got power crept. I'd rather use like a Theodore, for example, which I do have. Let's go. That's a flex. I'm sorry. Xavier, though, actually is one of the ones, even on my account still to this day, I might see some value. Remember, I talked about I had 2 Calvalexes. Well, pair her in there where she can do some poison explosions based off of that. I think that would be a very valuable champion to see some prospects behind. I think her and Elenaro are like the 2 that are paired very, very well with someone like Calvalex. So really good for wave clearing content. Maybe good in some other areas depending on how we look at it. So that one might be on my radar for a big maybe, but one out of the entire champion pool so far doesn't seem to be a big sell, you know? And then of course there's Wither, kind of the more obnoxious champion, is the best way I could put it. But she is a cleanser, which is valuable in areas like Phantom Shoguns where you need a 3-turn cooldown type cleanser. And then of course in PvP as well, she's one of those types of champions that can be obnoxious to keep the team, you know, keeping the team going as long as possible. The battle of attrition, for lack of a better word. So she's got a lot of healing, a lot of cleansing, and, you know, beefiness in terms of increased defense and whatnot. Very, very prominent champion there. And then, of course, if you're earlier game and you're progressing in the game, if you were to get a champion like this is a strong support champion to get you along the way so that you're actually doing a lot of, you know, a lot more content that maybe you were being stopped behind because of difficulty. So I do think that, like, this champion pool is unique. I don't think this is I think that even Plarium, for example, might be aware of, like, the value of this champion pool is not as high as like the previous one with like Brodos, Uko, to name a few of the champions that were really desirable. Gnut. A lot of them are a lot more substantial in the sense of like just providing value to your account. Those champions were way significant because they were actually meta, whereas this one is like, I don't want to say leftovers, but these are ones that are like, they've been around for a while. Some of them are still solid, but then you could kind of tell, like, you know, over time they've been power crept a little bit. Maybe they could use some love. Who knows? I don't know. Not too bad, but I don't think that this is one that's a crazy one to go out of your way for too much. It is, on the other hand, though, a lot more cheaper to do, and I've been seeing some ridiculous packs where you can get like 400 crystals for like $100, and then you could like buy that like 9 times. I seen that on somebody's account, and I was like, wow, they really opened up for people to be able to buy this if they wanted to, and I thought that was interesting. Whereas on the one that was more desirable, there was limitations, right? So I guess they were trying to avoid too much flooding of new champions and whatnot. So I'm not sure. I think this one's kind of like a little bit of a miss for me. I'm not going to go out of my way for it. If there's events where I can get some free Prism crystals and I get a chance to go for a summon, ideally for me, I would want like a Xavier and then maybe a Hefrak for some fun PvP arena content. And then, of course, you know, power farming through wave content with like double Cavalexes would be fun and exciting too as well. But nothing too extraordinary for me outside of that. I wouldn't want no dupes, which it would be at this point something like a Cavalex. I don't want an extra one right now, unless I was trying to push Faction Guardians, which could be a thing, I guess. But other than that, though, let me know what y'all think. Do you think this one's a pass or not? Or are we excited for it? Or how do we feel about it? I do also want to give one last little update. Besides the CVC content that we got coming out right now, this is a non-PR. There's a lot of issues because they've introduced the clan leagues, and you know, I think a lot of us ended up into tier 1. So like, it feels very, very weird how like this implementation kind of seemed like it didn't go the way it was supposed to. And I think Player made an announcement on it, which was unfortunate. But you know, putting that aside for a second, we did end up getting some boosted summon events. I believe this round we're going to have, as of the time of this recording, 10x for Duchess, which is like huge. Top tier meta champion, very, very strong. One of the best supports in the game. Definitely worth it. And then I think tomorrow we also got one for Necro, who is like a phenomenal champion. So very, very strong champion. 10x is coming up, but they are in 10x, it's not within a 2x window. So your experience may vary, and I would also caution you to be very, very careful. I am myself personally, I'm probably not pulling for either one of these with the fusion coming up. And also since the Void event that we had with the 2x Voids, 10x Siffy, I have no Voids. So the likelihood of me pulling for a Necro right now is probably 0 to none. So I'm probably not going to go out of my way too much for it. And with that being said, I think that kind of covers all of our big news that is coming up for Raid currently at the moment. How's your CVC going? Hope you're having a good day in it. And as always, guys, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always, always remember, stay ascended.
Click together, yeah.